In the middle of New York City's endless noise, where sirens echoed through narrow streets, ambition pressed against every brick wall, there lived a man who never raised his voice. He did not need to. His name was Frank Tieri, and while flashier gangsters chased headline and glory, Tieri mastered something far more dangerous: silence. Born into a world shaped by immigrant struggle, Frank Tieri grew up watching men learn how to survive without being noticed. New York in the early 20th century was not forgiving. It rewarded patience, discipline, and an understanding of power that never needed to announce itself. From an early age, Tieri absorbed those lessons quietly, storing them away while others made noise. He was not tall, not imposing, and certainly not dramatic. His strength came from observation. While other young men talked too much, Tieri listened. He noticed who spoke first in a room and who waited. He paid attention to who interrupted conversations and who controlled them without saying a word. These small social patterns became the foundation of his future influence. As he moved into adulthood, New York's underworld was changing. The era of reckless violence was slowly giving way to a more organized structure. Crime was becoming a business, and business favored men who understood order. Tieri fit perfectly into this transition. He wasn't interested in chaos. Chaos attracted attention. Attention invited consequences. He began at the lowest levels, running errands, carrying messages, and learning how information moved. Every favor he performed was calculated, every word chosen carefully. He made sure people remembered him as reliable, not memorable. That distinction mattered. Reliability built trust. Memorability built enemies. While others built reputations on fear, Tieri built his on consistency. He showed up when expected. He delivered exactly what was promised, nothing more, nothing less. Over time, this created something more valuable: than loyalty, predictability. People trusted him because he never surprised them. By the 1950s, New York's criminal networks were deeply entrenched, layered with hierarchy and tradition. Advancement required approval, patience, and an understanding of invisible rules. Tieri never rushed. He watched men above him fall, some to prison, others to betrayal, because they mistook visibility for power. Each fall reinforced his belief that survival depended on staying unseen. Tieri understood another truth most overlooked. Real authority rarely looks like authority. The most powerful people in any system are often the least obvious. They influence decisions quietly, shape outcomes indirectly, and let others take credit. This philosophy guided every move he made. Inside dimly lit rooms and back offices where deals were spoken in half sentences, Tieri's presence became familiar. He didn't dominate conversations. Instead, he allowed silence to do the work. People filled that silence with honesty, insecurity, or ambition, revealing more than they intended. Tieri remembered everything. As law enforcement pressure increased during the mid-century years, many figures panicked. They reacted emotionally, made mistakes, or turned on each other. Tieri did none of those things. When pressure rose, he became calmer. He reduced his footprint. He let others draw attention while he stayed in the background, adjusting quietly. What made Tieri different was not brutality or charisma. It was endurance. He outlasted men who were stronger, louder, and more feared. In a world where most careers ended violently or behind bars, Tieri survived decade after decade. That survival was not accidental. It was strategy. His rise was never obvious. There was no single moment where people suddenly noticed him. Instead, one day, decisions seemed to pass through him naturally. People sought his opinion without realizing why. His approval became quietly necessary. Influence had settled around him like gravity, felt, not seen. By the time many realized how powerful Frank Tieri had become, it was already too late to challenge him. He had positioned himself as essential yet invisible. Removing him would have disrupted everything. And disruption was something the underworld avoided at all costs. New York continued to roar around him, cars honking, crowds moving, empire rising and falling, but Tieri remained steady, untouched by spectacle. His power came not from intimidation, but from understanding human behavior better than those around him. This was only the beginning of a long, silent reign. A reign built not on fear but on patience, not on violence but on restraint, and not on noise but on knowing exactly when to say nothing at all. New York did not teach its lessons openly. It whispered them in alleyways, in the pause between sentences, in the way certain doors opened faster, for some men than others. Frank Tieri learned early that power did not announce itself, it revealed its shape only to those patient enough to study it. By the time he began moving deeper into the underworld, Tieri had already understood one essential truth. Violence was a tool, but control was the objective. Men who relied too heavily on fear burned brightly and disappeared just as quickly. The ones who endured were those who understood structure, who knew where they fit, and how to move without disturbing the balance. Tieri observed everything. He noticed how meetings began late on purpose, testing patience. He noticed how seating arrangements mattered, how eye contact was avoided or held just long enough to send a message. He watched how favors were exchanged quietly, never acknowledged directly, yet always remembered. These were not random habits, they were signals, and Tieri learned to read them fluently. He rarely spoke during gatherings, but when he did, his words were precise. No wasted phrases, no emotion, just information or agreement. This made people lean in when he finally chose to talk. Silence, he understood, was a currency. The less you spent it, the more valuable it became. As the city evolved through the 1950s, criminal operations became more refined. Loose crews gave way to structured organizations. Money flowed through fronts that looked legitimate from the outside. Businesses with paperwork, schedules, and layers of insulation. Tieri gravitated naturally toward these systems. Chaos bored him, order fascinated him. He developed a reputation for solving problems without creating new ones. If two sides disagreed, Tieri didn't escalate the conflict. He reframed it. He adjusted expectations, shifted timelines, and found compromises that allowed everyone to save face. This made him useful, and usefulness was the safest position of all. Law enforcement pressure intensified during this period. Raids became more frequent. Surveillance grew smarter. Many men responded by becoming paranoid, lashing out at shadows, suspecting betrayal everywhere. Tieri responded by simplifying. He reduced the number of people he dealt with directly. He tightened communication. He trusted fewer voices and verified everything quietly. What set him apart was discipline. He avoided excess. No flashy spending. No public indulgence. He dressed plainly, lived modestly, and blended into the background of the city. To neighbors, he was unremarkable. To associates, he was dependable. To rivals, he was difficult to read, and that uncertainty made him dangerous. Tieri also understood timing. He never rushed into opportunities. When promotions or new responsibilities appeared, he accepted them only when refusal would raise suspicion. Advancement was something he allowed to happen rather than chased. This made his rise appear natural, almost inevitable, as though he were simply filling gaps others left behind. He watched ambitious men overplay their hands. They pushed too fast, demanded recognition, or attempted to control too much too soon. Tieri did none of these things. He let ambition reveal itself in others, then learned from their mistakes. Every downfall reinforced his belief that restraint was the ultimate strength. Behind closed doors, his influence grew. People began routing decisions through him without formal acknowledgement. If a proposal needed quiet approval, Tieri was consulted. If a dispute needed calming, Tieri was present. He became a stabilizing force, and stability was rare and therefore valuable. As years passed, Tieri built an internal map of the underworld. He knew who owed whom, who resented whom, and who was pretending to be stronger than they were. Information flowed toward him naturally because people trusted him to keep it contained. He never repeated gossip. He never exploited secrets publicly. He stored them, knowing that the right moment would eventually arrive. That moment did not always come in dramatic fashion. Often, it came in silence when someone hesitated before making a move, waiting to see how Tieri would react. That hesitation was power. It meant he had become a reference point, a quiet center around which others adjusted their behavior. The city outside continued its relentless rhythm. New buildings rose. Old neighborhoods changed. Generations shifted. Through it all, Tieri remained consistent. He adapted without drawing attention, adjusted without resistance, and survived while others vanished. His philosophy was simple but rare. Never be the loudest voice, never be the first to threaten, and never be the one people blame when things go wrong. Instead, be the one they rely on when everything feels unstable. By the late 1950s, his position was no longer just functional, it was strategic. He had become part of the system's foundation. Removing him would have caused uncertainty, and uncertainty was something no organization could afford. Tieri understood that real power did not need to be defended. It needed to be maintained. He maintained it through patience, consistency, and an unshakable calm. While others fought for control, he quietly shaped outcomes. He was not feared in the traditional sense. He was respected, and respect lasted longer. It traveled farther. It protected him better than intimidation ever could. And as the years continued to unfold, it became clear that Frank Tieri was not merely surviving the underworld of New York. He was mastering it one silent decision at a time. Power, once earned quietly, must be carried carefully. Frank Tieri understood this better than most. As his influence expanded, he became more deliberate, more restrained. He knew that every additional responsibility brought with it greater exposure. And exposure was the enemy of longevity. Where others sought momentum, Tieri sought balance. The underworld of New York thrived on motion, money changing hands, alliances shifting, loyalties tested. Tieri learned to slow that motion around himself. He positioned his role not as a driver of action, but as a filter. Decisions passed through him, refined and softened before they moved forward. This reduced conflict, minimized risk, and kept attention away from him. He developed an instinct for pressure. He could feel when tension was building long before it exploded. A change in tone, a delayed response, a sudden eagerness that felt forced. These signals guided him. When he sensed instability, he didn't confront it directly. He created space. He delayed outcomes. He let emotions cool before they became dangerous. This patience confused some and frustrated others, but it protected him. While impatient men revealed themselves, Tieri remained unreadable. He never appeared rushed, never appeared anxious. Even when stakes were high, his demeanor stayed unchanged. This consistency became his signature. As time passed, people stopped testing him, not because they feared retaliation, but because they knew he would not react impulsively. Provocation had no effect. Pressure produced no cracks. In a world built on ego, Tieri's lack of visible ego became disarming. He also understood the importance of delegation. He never placed himself at the center of activity. Others handled logistics, communication, and execution. Tieri stayed one step removed, offering guidance rather than commands. This distance insulated him. Mistakes occurred elsewhere. Credit, when it came, flowed indirectly. Money moved differently through his hands. He never chased maximum profit. He preferred steady returns, predictable flows, arrangements that could survive scrutiny. Risk something to be minimized, not embraced. Where others saw opportunity in chaos, Tieri saw danger. His relationships reflected the same philosophy. He maintained fewer connections but invested deeply in each one. Trust was earned slowly, tested quietly, and once established, protected fiercely. He did not abandon people casually. Loyalty, in his view, was a long-term asset, not a bargaining chip. At the same time, Tieri never allowed sentiment to cloud judgment. He separated personal feeling from decision-making with practiced ease. This made him reliable in moments when emotions threatened to derail outcomes. People knew that when Tieri spoke, his words were measured, not emotional. Law enforcement presence continued to grow more sophisticated. Surveillance techniques improved. Informants became more common. Many figures responded by retreating entirely or becoming erratic. Tieri adjusted instead. He refined communication methods, shortened chains of contact, and avoided patterns that could be tracked. He also embraced invisibility as a strategy. He attended fewer public gatherings, reduced unnecessary appearances, and kept his daily routines flexible. There was no schedule to follow, no habits to exploit. Predictability, he believed, was a weakness. As younger men entered the underworld, eager and reckless, Tieri observed them with quiet interest. He recognized himself in none of them. Their hunger for recognition felt dangerous. He allowed them space to operate, knowing time would teach its lessons more harshly than he ever could. Some rose quickly. Some fell even faster. Tieri remained where he was, steady, grounded, untouched by sudden shifts. His power grew not because he demanded it, but because others leaned on him without realizing how much weight he carried. He became a reference point during uncertainty. When disputes arose, People waited to see how Tieri would respond before acting. This pause, this hesitation was influence in its purest form. It required no enforcement. It existed naturally. Behind closed doors, he continued to collect information, not aggressively, not greedily. It came to him because people trusted him with their concerns. He listened more than he spoke, absorbed more than he revealed. Knowledge accumulated quietly, layer by layer. What distinguished Tieri most was his acceptance of time. He did not fight it. He did not try to outrun it. He used it. He allowed years to work in his favor, eroding rivals, reshaping landscapes, clearing paths he never had to force open. By the early 1960s, his presence was deeply embedded. He was no longer just a participant in the system. He was part of its memory. People remembered decisions associated with him as stable outcomes, moments when things did not spiral out of control. That reputation shielded him. It discouraged challenges. It invited consultation, and it ensured that when changes occurred, Tieri was never caught unprepared. He lived without spectacle. No dramatic confrontations. No public victories. Just continuity. In a world obsessed with dominance, he chose endurance. In a culture driven by noise, he perfected silence. And as New York continued to evolve around him, its streets changing, its rhythms shifting, Frank Tieri remained quietly anchored, carrying the weight of patience like armor, knowing that true power did not rush, did not shout, and did not need to be seen to be felt. Authority, when real, does not announce itself. It settles into a room long before its owner arrives and remains even after he leaves. Frank Tieri came to understand this distinction instinctively. As his role deepened, he focused less on what he controlled and more on what he influenced. Control invited resistance. Influence invited cooperation. By the mid-1960s, his presence carried an unspoken weight. Conversations shifted when he entered. Not abruptly, subtly. Voices lowered. Words became more careful. No one instructed this behavior. It happened naturally, the result of years of measured consistency. Tieri had refined the art of indirect leadership. He rarely gave direct orders. Instead, he framed situations, presented options, and allowed others to arrive at the conclusion he already favored. This preserved autonomy while guiding outcomes. People believed decisions were their own, which made them defend those decisions fiercely. He understood that people protected what they chose. This insight shaped every interaction. When a plan succeeded, credit was distributed outward. When it failed, responsibility dissolved into the system. Tieri remained untouched, not through manipulation, but through design. Trust became his most valuable currency. He protected it relentlessly. He never made promises he couldn't keep. He never exaggerated capabilities. He never acted surprised by outcomes he had already anticipated. This reliability made people comfortable around him, and comfort lowered defenses. At the same time, he never allowed familiarity to become weakness. Boundaries were clear, even if they were unspoken. No one assumed access. No one felt entitled to his time. Meetings occurred when necessary, not out of habit. Every interaction had purpose. The city continued to change, and with it, the pressures. Law enforcement adapted, learning patterns, exploiting predictability. Tieri responded by staying fluid. He shifted routines without explanation, changed methods quietly, and avoided repetition. If something worked too well for too long, he abandoned it. He also recognized the danger of isolation. Total withdrawal bred suspicion. Instead, he maintained a balanced visibility, present enough to remain relevant, distant enough to remain protected. This balance required constant attention. Too much exposure invited scrutiny. Too little invited replacement. Others underestimated the effort required to remain invisible. Tieri knew it was work. It required restraint, discipline, and the ability to resist impulse. He declined opportunities that seemed profitable but carried unnecessary risk. He accepted slower progress in exchange for stability. He also understood generational shifts. Younger figures brought new energy, new methods, and new recklessness. Tieri neither opposed nor embraced them fully. He allowed them space to operate while quietly adjusting structures to absorb their volatility. This prevented sudden disruptions. When disputes arose, Tieri listened longer than anyone else. He allowed people to exhaust themselves emotionally before offering perspective. By the time he spoke, tempers had cooled, and his words carried clarity. This made his guidance feel reasonable rather than authoritative. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. Silence did more work than volume ever could. In moments of tension, he allowed pauses to stretch, forcing others to confront their own uncertainty. Those pauses revealed more than arguments. Behind this calm exterior was constant calculation. Tieri assessed risk continuously, adjusting positions, strengthening weak points, and removing unnecessary exposure. He thought in years, not weeks. He prepared for outcomes others hadn't considered yet. Money continued to flow, but it was never his focus. Wealth was a tool, not a measure of success. He valued sustainability over accumulation. A steady stream that lasted decades mattered more than sudden windfalls that attracted attention. As his influence expanded, so did expectations. People sought his approval, more frequently, sometimes without realizing it. This placed him in a delicate position. Too much involvement would reveal his importance. Too little would reduce his relevance. He navigated this carefully. He chose moments to intervene with precision. A quiet suggestion here. A delayed response there. Small adjustments that redirected entire outcomes without appearing decisive. This was his strength, shaping events without owning them. His personal life remained deliberately unremarkable, routine, modest, predictable only in its simplicity. This separation between public influence and private normalcy protected him. It made him difficult to profile, difficult to target. Those who attempted to challenge him found no clear point of attack. He had no obvious ambition to undermine, no visible excess to expose, no dramatic moves to exploit. His power was distributed, not concentrated. Over time, this created a unique form of authority, not fear-based, not charisma-driven. It was authority rooted in dependability. When uncertainty arose, people looked toward Tieri not for orders, but for stability. He understood that systems endure only when they adapt quietly. Loud change triggered resistance. Quiet change reshaped reality. Tieri specialized in the latter. As years passed, his influence became normalized. People stopped questioning why certain decisions aligned with his preferences. It felt natural. It felt right. That normalization was the final stage of power. He had become part of the environment like the city itself. Always present, rarely noticed, impossible to ignore when absent. And in that quiet authority, Frank Tieri continued his careful stewardship of influence, knowing that the most enduring legacies were built not through force, but through balance. There comes a point in every long career where the challenge is no longer growth, but maintenance. Frank Tieri reached that point quietly. His position no longer required expansion. It required control of shadows, those unseen spaces where mistakes were born and loyalties weakened. He understood that the most dangerous threats were rarely direct. They formed slowly, unnoticed, often from within. Ambition, resentment, impatience, these were the real enemies. Tieri did not confront them head-on. He managed them indirectly, reshaping environments so that destructive impulses had nowhere to grow. One of his most effective tools was distance. He kept enough space between himself and daily operations to avoid entanglement, yet remained close enough to sense imbalance. This distance created a buffer. Problems reached him filtered, stripped of emotion, leaving only essential information. He discouraged dependency without announcing it. When people relied too heavily on him, he redirected them gently, pushing decision-making outward. This strengthened the structure while preserving his role as a stabilizer rather than a crutch. Systems that depended on a single figure, he believed, were destined to collapse. Tieri also recognized the importance of controlled access. Not everyone deserved proximity. Not everyone needed answers. Information was distributed deliberately, according to necessity rather than curiosity. This prevented leaks and reduced misunderstanding. As pressure from outside forces continued to evolve, Tieri adapted internally. He refined how messages traveled, shortened lines of communication, and reduced redundancy. Efficiency was not about speed, it was about clarity. Fewer words meant fewer mistakes. He watched carefully as new personalities emerged, each bringing their own style and energy. Some sought approval aggressively. Others attempted subtle manipulation. Tieri responded to neither. He allowed time to reveal intentions. Time, he knew, exposed everyone eventually. When conflict surfaced, He addressed symptoms rather than causes. He adjusted roles, shifted responsibilities, altered incentives. Often, the conflict dissolved without confrontation. This preserved relationships and prevented escalation. Fear was never his primary motivator. He understood that fear produced obedience but destroyed initiative. Instead, he cultivated predictability. People knew what to expect from him, and that consistency created confidence. He avoided creating rivals by refusing to compete. He did not challenge authority openly, nor did he attempt to dominate conversations. This disarmed those who expected resistance. Without opposition, their aggression had no target. Tieri also understood fatigue. Long involvement wore people down. Mistakes multiplied when exhaustion set in. He monitored pace carefully, encouraging pauses, delaying actions when urgency felt artificial. This prevented burnout and preserved focus. Behind the scenes, he continued to adjust his own exposure. He reduced public presence further, delegated representation, and avoided patterns. If something became routine, he changed it. Routine, in his view, was the enemy of discretion. His restraint extended to emotion. He neither celebrated victories nor reacted strongly to setbacks. This emotional neutrality unsettled those who expected visible reactions. It kept negotiations grounded and discouraged manipulation. Money remained steady, predictable, controlled. He resisted the temptation to push boundaries for marginal gain. He understood diminishing returns. Past a certain point, profit attracted more risk than reward. As years passed, Tieri's influence became quieter still. It operated through expectation rather than instruction. People anticipated his preferences and adjusted accordingly. This was not obedience, it was alignment. He maintained this alignment by remaining fair, not generous, not harsh fair. Agreements were honored. Lines were respected. Consequences, when necessary, were proportionate and controlled. This fairness reinforced trust. He also cultivated patience in others by modeling it himself. His calm responses during tense moments set the tone. Others followed suit, consciously or not. Emotional contagion worked in his favor. The city continued to change around him. New pressures emerged. New risks appeared. Tieri responded with the same approach he always had: observe, adjust, endure. He never mistook survival for stagnation. Maintenance required constant effort. Every day demanded attention to detail, awareness of subtle shifts, readiness to act quietly. He accepted that power, once stabilized, became invisible work. There were no milestones, no celebrations, just continuity. That continuity was his success. Those who mistook his silence for weakness learned otherwise, often too late. Not through confrontation, but through exclusion. Opportunities stopped reaching them. Support faded. Their influence diminished naturally. Tieri rarely needed to remove obstacles directly. He allowed systems to do that work. Systems, once properly balanced, corrected themselves. In managing shadows, he ensured that nothing dangerous ever reached the surface. The underworld continued to function smoothly, quietly, predictably. And in that smooth operation, Frank Tieri remained exactly where he wanted to be, not at the center of attention, but at the center of stability. Restraint is not the absence of action, it is the mastery of it. Few understood this as deeply as Frank Tieri. As time moved forward, his greatest strength became his ability to choose what not to do. In a world driven by impulse and reaction, restraint became his quiet advantage. He learned early that every action created ripples. Some ripples faded quickly. Others traveled farther than expected. Tieri trained himself to see those ripples before they formed. He imagined consequences not as immediate outcomes, but as long chains, each link affecting the next. This habit slowed him down, but it also protected him. When opportunities arose that promised rapid expansion, he hesitated. He examined the cost hidden beneath the reward. Who would notice? Who would feel threatened? Who would benefit enough to become dependent? Most opportunities failed this test. He let them pass without regret. Others mistook this for caution bordering on fear. It was neither. It was discipline. Tieri understood that momentum was seductive. Once gained, it demanded constant feeding. Growth required exposure, and exposure attracted attention. Attention shortened lifespans. Instead, he focused on refining what already existed. Small adjustments, subtle reinforcements, quiet correction. He believed that a stable structure, carefully maintained, outperformed aggressive expansion every time. His restraint extended to relationships. He avoided emotional entanglement. Personal loyalty mattered, but sentimentality did not. He did not allow friendships to override judgment. Nor did he allow grudges to linger. Emotion clouded clarity, and clarity was his greatest asset. When disagreements surfaced, he avoided confrontation whenever possible, not because he feared it, but because confrontation created records, memories, grudges, stories. He preferred resolution without narrative. If no story existed, nothing could be repeated. He also understood restraint in communication. He spoke less as his influence grew. Words once released could not be retrieved. Silence, on the other hand, preserved options. He allowed others to speak themselves into positions they would later have to defend. In moments of tension, he slowed everything down. Delays frustrated impulsive personalities, but they also exposed weak arguments. Time, applied correctly, acted like pressure, revealing flaws without force. His lifestyle reflected the same philosophy. No excess. No indulgence that invited curiosity. He avoided patterns that could be observed, routines that could be exploited. Even comfort was moderated. Too much comfort dulled awareness. He believed vigilance required discomfort, not pain, but alertness. He stayed observant, present, attentive to subtle changes in tone, behavior, and atmosphere. Small shifts signaled larger movements beneath the surface. As external pressures evolved, Tieri adapted without resistance. He did not fight change. He absorbed it, adjusted to it, and allowed others to struggle against it. Resistance drew attention. Adaptation preserved relevance. He also practiced restraint and ambition. He never sought titles, recognition, or symbolic authority. Symbols attracted challengers. He preferred function over form, influence over image. This made him difficult to classify. He was not the most visible figure, nor the most aggressive, yet outcomes aligned around him. Decisions flowed in directions he anticipated. Stability followed his involvement. Those who attempted to provoke him found nothing to push against. No reaction, no escalation. Provocation requires engagement to succeed. Tieri offered none. He understood that many conflicts existed only because someone needed to feel dominant. By refusing to participate in dominance games, he neutralized them. Control without competition became his signature. Money continued to arrive steadily. He managed it with the same restraint. Investments were conservative, risks were calculated. He avoided greed not out of morality, but out of strategy. Greed narrowed vision. As years passed, restraint became habit. Habit became identity. People associated him with calm outcomes, steady resolution, predictable fairness. That reputation preceded him into every room. It also protected him. Those considering reckless moves hesitated, knowing his presence would complicate matters. He became a moderating force simply by existing. He never mistook restraint for passivity. When action was necessary, it was decisive, efficient, and brief. No theatrics, no lingering effects. He addressed issues once and moved on. This balance, knowing when to act and when to remain still, was his greatest skill. It could not be taught easily. It required patience, self-awareness, and confidence within. Ego. Confidence, for Tieri, was internal. It did not need validation. It did not require demonstration. It rested in preparation and consistency. In a world obsessed with dominance, he chose discipline. In an environment fueled by reaction, he practiced restraint. And through that restraint, he continued to endure, quietly shaping outcomes without ever needing to announce his hand. True control does not rely on pressure. It relies on alignment. Frank Tieri mastered this distinction over time, learning that force created resistance, while alignment created momentum. By shaping the environment rather than confronting individuals, he allowed outcomes to unfold naturally in his favor. He understood that most people wanted certainty more than power. They wanted to know where they stood, what was expected, and what the boundaries were. Tieri provided this clarity without speaking it aloud. His consistency established invisible rules. Once learned, those rules governed behavior more effectively than threats ever could. He avoided confrontation not because he feared conflict, but because conflict hardened positions. Hardened positions required resolution, and resolution created winners and losers. Losers carried resentment. Resentment bred instability. Tieri preferred solutions where no one felt defeated. Instead of demanding compliance, he created incentives. Roles were structured so cooperation benefited everyone involved. Disruption offered no advantage. This made discipline self-enforcing. People maintained order because disorder no longer served them. He also recognized that authority weakened when it tried to control everything. Micromanagement invited scrutiny and exposed fault lines. Tieri trusted the systems he helped shape. He intervened only when necessary, preserving the illusion of independence while maintaining influence. His communication style reinforced this approach. He asked questions instead of issuing instructions. Questions guided thinking. They allowed others to arrive at conclusions organically. When people believed they had chosen a path themselves, they committed to it fully. He paid attention to tone, timing, and context. A suggestion delivered too early appeared manipulative. Too late, and it lost relevance. Tieri waited for the precise moment when a small nudge could redirect an entire outcome. This patience unsettled more aggressive personalities. They mistook his calm for indecision. They underestimated the preparation behind his silence. When outcomes consistently aligned with his preferences, confusion replaced confidence. He allowed that confusion to exist. Confusion discouraged challenge. It made people cautious. Caution slowed reckless action. Tieri also understood the value of ambiguity. He rarely clarified his full position. Partial understanding kept others guessing, adjusting, recalibrating. This constant adjustment kept him ahead without ever having to move visibly. When disputes arose, he reframed them as logistical issues rather than personal ones. By shifting focus from intent to process, he removed emotion from the equation. Once emotion faded, resolution became possible. He avoided public displays of dominance. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Authority expressed loudly invited testing. Authority expressed quietly invited acceptance. Over time, his presence altered behavior. People prepared more carefully before approaching him. They organized thoughts, refined proposals, anticipated questions. This reduced inefficiency and reinforced his role as a filter rather than a commander. He also paid close attention to loyalty, not as a demand, but as a signal. Forced loyalty was unreliable. Chosen loyalty endured. He never pressured allegiance. He allowed it to develop naturally, through fairness and predictability. Those who aligned with him did so because it made sense, not because they were afraid. This made their support more stable and less prone to collapse under pressure. He understood. That force created short-term compliance but long-term opposition. Control without force created sustainability. Sustainability was his objective. As time passed, Tieri's influence required less effort. Systems ran smoothly. People anticipated expectations. Adjustments happened automatically. He became less involved not because he was less powerful, but because his power had been fully integrated. He also remained alert to complacency. Control, once achieved, could decay. He continued to observe, listen, and adjust quietly. Stability required maintenance. External pressures continued to evolve. Tieri adapted internally, shifting emphasis, redistributing responsibilities, and refining boundaries. He did this without announcement, allowing change to appear organic. He resisted the temptation to solidify control through overt measures. Formal authority limited flexibility. Informal influence preserved it. He remained informal by design. Those who attempted to assert dominance over him found no leverage. He did not compete. Without competition, dominance lost meaning. He believed that the strongest position was one that did not need defense. His position rarely required explanation. Outcomes spoke for themselves. Even when mistakes occurred, Tieri avoided assigning blame. Blame fractured systems. Correction strengthened them. He focused on solutions, not accountability theater. This approach earned quiet respect, not admiration, not fear. Respect, rooted in reliability. He maintained emotional distance without appearing cold. He was measured, not detached, present, not involved. This balance kept relationships functional and professional. In the end, his control was not about authority over people, but authority over process. He shaped the flow of decisions, information, and incentives. Through that control, behavior followed. Frank Tieri did not rule through force. He ruled through understanding. and that understanding allowed him to remain steady while others exhausted themselves trying to dominate. Silence is often mistaken for absence. In truth, silence is structure. It is the space that holds everything else in place. Frank Tieri understood this intuitively, and over time he built an entire architecture around it, one where words were used sparingly, intentions were implied rather than stated, and meaning lived between sentences. He treated silence as a tool, not a void. In conversations, he allowed pauses to stretch longer than most people found comfortable. Those pauses created pressure. People filled them with explanations, clarifications, and confessions. The more they spoke, the more they revealed. Tieri listened, absorbing details without interruption, without judgment. He learned that silence disarmed aggression. Anger needed resistance to grow. Without resistance, it lost momentum. When confronted with frustration or accusation, Tieri responded calmly or not at all. This lack of reaction shifted the dynamic. The aggressor became self-conscious, uncertain, exposed. In meetings, he rarely spoke first. Speaking first set the frame. He preferred to see how others framed issues themselves. Their priorities, fears, and ambitions surfaced naturally. Only then did he decide whether to intervene and how. When he did speak, his words were measured and precise. He avoided absolutes. He left room for interpretation. This ambiguity preserved flexibility. If circumstances changed, his statements could adapt without contradiction. He understood that clarity was powerful, but overclarity was dangerous. Clear enough to guide action, vague enough to deny fixation. This balance protected him. Silence also protected relationships. By not reacting impulsively, he avoided saying things that could not be taken back. By not explaining everything, he avoided binding himself to positions that might later require reversal. He applied the same principle to information flow. Not everything needed to be shared. Not everyone needed to know. Knowledge, when distributed too widely, lost its value and increased risk. Tieri kept information compartmentalized, allowing only what was necessary to move forward. This created a network where no single person held the entire picture. If one part failed, the whole did not collapse. Resilience was built into the design. He also used silence to test loyalty. People who could operate without constant reassurance demonstrated discipline. Those who demanded explanations revealed insecurity. Tieri noted the difference quietly. Over time, his silence became interpretive. People tried to read meaning into it. This worked in his favor. They adjusted behavior proactively, anticipating reactions that never needed to be expressed. This anticipation reduced friction. Decisions aligned naturally. Corrections happened without instruction. Silence became guidance. He never corrected people publicly. Public correction created embarrassment, which created resentment. Instead, he allowed mistakes to reveal themselves or addressed them privately without spectacle. This preserved dignity and loyalty. His restraint extended even to success. He did not celebrate openly. Celebration invited attention. Attention invited scrutiny. He preferred quiet satisfaction, internal acknowledgement, and forward focus. He understood that noise attracted predators, silence deterred them. Invisibility, when intentional, became armor. As external pressure fluctuated, Tieri's reliance on silence increased. He spoke less, delegated more, and trusted systems he had shaped. This reduced exposure and reinforced stability. He also understood the psychological effect of silence on rivals. Without feedback, they struggled to assess their standing. Uncertainty eroded confidence. Confidence, once weakened, led to mistakes. Tieri never exploited those mistakes immediately. He waited. Time amplified errors. Patience turned small missteps into decisive disadvantages. He also recognized that silence allowed him to change course without announcement. Adjustments happened quietly. By the time others noticed, the shift was already complete. In personal interactions, his silence conveyed composure. He did not fill space with reassurance or dominance. He allowed others to reveal their needs. This made negotiations easier. Needs once known could be accommodated or redirected. He believed that words were promises. Promises created obligations. By speaking less, he reduced obligation. Freedom of movement mattered more than verbal commitment. Even under stress, he maintained this discipline. Stress often compelled people to talk to justify, explain, defend. Tieri did none of these. He waited. Stress passed. Clarity returned. Silence also sharpened his perception. Without the distraction of constant speech, he noticed details other shifts in tone, changes in posture, inconsistencies in stories. These details informed decisions quietly. He did not fear being misunderstood. Misunderstanding often protected him. It obscured intent and preserved options. As years passed, silence became his signature. People associated him with calm, measured outcomes. They trusted his presence even when he said nothing. That trust did not come from transparency. It came from consistency. Silence, consistently applied, became reliable. He never explained his philosophy. He lived it. Explanation weakened mystique. Mystique preserved authority. In the architecture of silence he built, every pause had purpose, every word carried weight, and every unspoken understanding reinforced his position. Frank Tieri did not need to be heard to be influential. His silence spoke for him, shaping outcomes without ever revealing the hand behind them. Pressure reveals character. Some bend under it. Others break. A few learn how to move with it, allowing force to pass through without damage. Frank Tieri belonged to the last group. He did not resist pressure directly. He redirected it, absorbed it, and used it to refine his position. As scrutiny intensified across the city, pressure arrived from multiple directions at once. Expectations grew heavier. Margins for error narrowed. Decisions that once felt routine now carried greater consequence. Tieri responded not with urgency, but with calibration. He adjusted pace, reassessed exposure, and reduced unnecessary friction. He understood that pressure often created false urgency. People rushed because they felt watched. They made decisions prematurely, believing speed equaled safety. Tieri rejected this instinct. He slowed things down deliberately, knowing that haste created patterns and patterns were traceable. He examined every process for points of compression. Where pressure concentrated, risk multiplied. He redistributed responsibility, decentralizing actions so no single point bore excessive weight. This diffusion protected the whole. He also paid attention to human response under stress. Some grew talkative, others withdrew. Some attempted to assert control aggressively. Tieri noted these reactions carefully. Stress stripped away pretense. It showed who could be trusted when circumstances tightened. He positioned himself as a stabilizer during these moments, not by offering reassurance but by maintaining consistency. His calm became a reference point. Others mirrored it unconsciously, easing collective tension. When mistakes occurred, and they inevitably did, Tieri resisted the urge to correct immediately. Immediate correction often amplified attention. Instead, he contained fallout quietly, isolated the issue, and addressed it methodically. The goal was resolution without narrative. He avoided public responses. Public responses invited questions. Questions invited scrutiny. Silence, paired with internal correction, kept matters contained. Pressure also tested loyalty. When stakes rose, some people recalculated priorities. Tieri anticipated this. He never relied on a single bond. Redundancy was built into relationships. If one connection weakened, others compensated. He did not react emotionally to shifts in loyalty. Emotional reaction clouded judgment. Instead, he adjusted structures so personal choices had limited impact. Systems absorbed fluctuation. He also understood that pressure could be leveraged. When others felt constrained, options narrowed. Tieri widened his own options by remaining flexible. He avoided commitments that limited maneuverability. He kept alternatives open. In negotiations, he allowed pressure to work on others while he remained steady. The contrast created advantage. Those under strain revealed urgency. Urgency revealed leverage. He never exploited leverage aggressively. Aggressive exploitation bred resentment. Instead, he used leverage to align interests. Outcomes benefited multiple sides, reducing backlash. As enforcement strategies evolved, Tieri adapted quietly. He changed rhythms, altered communication habits, and removed predictable behaviors. He treated every adjustment as temporary, knowing that permanence bred complacency. He also reduced the number of people who needed to act under pressure. Fewer actors meant fewer mistakes. He simplified chains of responsibility, clarified roles, and eliminated overlap. Pressure also tested discipline. Under stress, people reverted to habit. Tieri ensured his habits were resilient. He practiced restraint even when tension tempted reaction. He avoided discussing pressure openly. Discussion magnified stress. Instead, he focused on actionable adjustments. Less talk, more alignment. He also recognized that pressure created opportunity for misinterpretation. Signals were read incorrectly. Intentions were assumed. Tieri minimized ambiguity in action while preserving ambiguity in intent. Actions were clear. Motivations remained opaque. This protected him from being boxed into narratives. Without a clear narrative, he could not be easily targeted. He monitored external shifts without becoming reactive. Overreaction created exposure. Underreaction created vulnerability. He balanced between the two carefully. His personal demeanor remained unchanged. No visible anxiety. No sudden intensity. This consistency discouraged speculation. Speculation thrived on visible stress. He also managed his own internal pressure. He compartmentalized concerns, addressing them one at a time. He did not allow cumulative stress to dictate behavior. Control over self preceded control over circumstance. When confronted with direct challenges, he responded proportionally. No escalation, no retreat. Just enough response to re-establish balance. Balance, not dominance, was his objective. He understood that pressure cycles. It rose and fell. Those who panic during peaks often expose themselves unnecessarily. Tieri waited for cycles to turn. Time remained his ally. Pressure exhausted others faster than it exhausted him. Endurance outperformed intensity. As months passed, the system adjusted around him. Pressure redistributed. Tension eased. Those who had overextended retreated. Tieri remained steady. He did not claim credit for stability. Claiming credit invited attention. Stability was its own reward. He accepted that navigating pressure required constant awareness. There was no final state of safety, only continuous adjustment. He embraced this reality without frustration. In doing so, he transformed pressure from threat into filter. It removed recklessness, exposed weakness, and rewarded discipline. Frank Tieri did not escape pressure. He mastered movement within it. And through that mastery, he continued to endure calm, precise, and unshaken. Most people live inside the moment. They react to what is directly in front of them, measuring success by immediate results and danger by immediate threats. Frank Tieri trained himself to live elsewhere, in the long view. He thought in arcs rather than events, in outcomes rather than actions. This perspective shaped everything he did. The long view demanded patience, and patience demanded confidence. Not the kind of confidence that needed validation, but the quiet assurance that time handled correctly would resolve most problems. Tieri trusted time because he understood how to use it. He did not wait passively. He waited actively, adjusting conditions while letting consequences mature. He believed that many conflicts solved themselves if given space. People cooled down, priorities shifted, new pressures replaced old ones. By not intervening too early, he avoided unnecessary entanglement. Intervention, once made, created responsibility. Responsibility limited flexibility. He also understood that reputations aged. A man who seemed formidable today could be irrelevant tomorrow. A rising figure could burn out before reaching stability. Tieri avoided attaching himself too tightly to any single personality. He invested in structures, not individuals. This long view shaped how he handled loyalty. He valued consistency over intensity. Loud loyalty often faded under strain. Quiet reliability endured. He watched how people behaved over time, not how they performed in moments of crisis. Patterns mattered more than promises. He avoided decisions that felt satisfying but created future problems. Immediate victories often planted seeds of long-term instability. Tieri preferred outcomes that appeared modest at first but matured into lasting advantage. In negotiations, he rarely pushed for maximum gain. He aimed for agreements that could be sustained. Sustainability mattered more than dominance. Agreements that felt fair survived scrutiny. Agreements that felt forced invited resistance. He also recognized the danger of over-optimization. Systems tuned too tightly failed when conditions changed. Tieri left room for adjustment. He allowed inefficiencies if they increased resilience. Resilience outperformed precision over time. The long view also informed how he handled setbacks. He did not frame them as failures. He framed them as data. Setbacks revealed weaknesses, tested assumptions, and clarified priorities. He adjusted accordingly without emotion. He never rushed to restore appearances. Appearances were temporary. Substance endured. He focused on restoring function first. Image corrected itself later. He avoided nostalgia. Past success did not guarantee future relevance. He remained open to change, even when change threatened comfort. Comfort dulled perception. He resisted it deliberately. As new methods and pressures emerged, Tieri evaluated them calmly. He did not dismiss unfamiliar approaches outright. He observed, tested quietly, and adopted what proved useful. Adaptation was not betrayal of principle, it was its application. He also understood that visibility had a lifespan. Staying visible too long invited challenge. Staying invisible too long invited replacement. The long view required alternating between the two without signaling intention. He maintained relevance by remaining useful, not prominent. Usefulness endured beyond personality. Prominence attracted competition. In his personal conduct, he avoided extremes. Extreme generosity created dependency. Extreme severity created fear. Both were unstable. He stayed measured, predictable, and fair. He accepted that time would eventually diminish his direct involvement. No position lasted forever. The goal was not immortality, but continuity. Systems should function without constant intervention. He quietly prepared for this reality by strengthening processes rather than centralizing authority. He ensured that decisions did not rely solely on his presence. This reduced pressure on himself and increased durability overall. He also avoided mentoring too openly. Overt mentorship created heirs, and heirs created succession battles. Instead, he modeled behavior. Those who learned did so by observation, not instruction. The long view required humility. Tieri accepted that he could not control everything. He focused on what he could influence and ignored the rest. Control over self mattered more than control over others. He resisted the temptation to correct history. Narratives shifted. Interpretations changed. He did not attempt to manage his legacy actively. Legacy management invited exposure. Instead, he focused on present alignment. If the present was stable, the future could take care of itself. He also understood that time tested discipline. Years of restraint could be undone by a single impulsive moment. He guarded against fatigue, against complacency, against the belief that survival guaranteed safety. Every day required the same attention as the first. He never relaxed standards. Relaxation bred mistakes. The long view also softened his reactions. He did not celebrate too early or despair too deeply. Emotional extremes distorted judgment. He stayed centered. He allowed others to chase urgency. Urgency exhausted them. He conserved energy for endurance. As cycles turned and pressures shifted, Tieri remained anchored. His decisions reflected foresight rather than reaction. He measured success not by expansion but by continuity. In choosing the long view, he accepted slower rewards in exchange for lasting influence. That trade-off defined his approach. Frank Tieri did not seek to win moments. He sought to outlast them. And in that commitment to time, patience, and restraint, he continued to shape outcomes, quietly confident that the future favored those who understood how to wait. Influence is invisible, yet it moves mountains. It is not measured by the volume of command, but by the alignment of choices around a single vision. Frank Tieri had mastered this art, and over time it became the backbone of his survival and authority. He realized that overt control created obvious targets, while subtle influence was imperceptible until it had already shaped outcomes. Tieri approached influence like a craftsman. Every conversation, every gesture, every pause had a purpose. It was never forceful. It was persuasive by design. He allowed others to feel as if they were making decisions independently, while in reality, their choices often mirrored his quiet guidance. People sought his approval because it eased their path, not because he demanded it. And the more they aligned with his thinking, the more their actions reinforced his vision. He understood that influence required credibility. It was not enough to simply assert opinions, one had to demonstrate consistent judgment over time. Tieri had cultivated that reputation meticulously. People knew that his assessments were measured, his insights accurate, and his advice reliable. They trusted him without question, not because of fear, not because of loyalty, but because of repeated evidence. This trust was a fragile yet powerful currency, and he managed it carefully. He also recognized that influence required patience. Most men wanted immediate results. They saw dominance through confrontation, shouting, or rapid maneuvering. Tieri preferred the long game. He let situations develop, studied the behaviors of those involved, and then introduced subtle nudges. By the time others realized they were aligned with his intentions, the decisions felt natural, inevitable, and mutually beneficial. That is the essence of invisible power. People execute your strategy without realizing it is your strategy. Observation was central to his method. Tieri noted everything: tone, body language, hesitation, microexpressions, and timing. These seemingly minor details revealed priorities, weaknesses, and inclination. Knowledge alone did not constitute influence. It had to be interpreted and acted upon with discretion. He absorbed information silently, allowing others to underestimate both his awareness and his reach. He rarely intervened directly. Force invited resistance, and resistance slowed progress. Instead, he arranged circumstances so that preferred choices were the easiest, most logical, or most profitable for those involved. By engineering environments rather than issuing orders, he allowed people to feel agency while still guiding outcomes. This approach preserved autonomy while subtly shaping behavior, a combination that yielded stability and minimized friction. Tieri also understood the psychological dimension of influence. People sought affirmation, recognition, and certainty. He offered these in controlled doses. A nod at the right moment, a brief acknowledgement, or a quiet confirmation could steer decisions without a single word of instruction. Influence, he knew, was more about timing and subtle reinforcement than it was about confrontation or authority. He managed networks carefully. He knew that relationships were conduits of information, loyalty, and leverage. Tieri nurtured bonds selectively, reinforcing connections that were both dependable and aligned with his long-term objectives. Simultaneously, he avoided entanglements that created obligations he could not sustain. Influence required freedom, and freedom demanded careful curation of association. External pressures, both from law enforcement and rival factions, tested his capacity to influence. Tieri responded by amplifying subtlety. Direct confrontation drew attention and risked exposure. Instead, he allowed information to flow through intermediaries, calibrated the release of sensitive details, and ensured that outcomes aligned with his priorities without revealing his hand. Patience, timing, and discretion became his shields. Conflict was another arena where influence was more effective than force. Tieri rarely resolved disputes through intimidation or aggression. He guided the discussion, reframed narratives, and created conditions where solutions naturally favored his vision. Disagreements dissolved not through domination, but through redirection. People walked away thinking they had won, even as the outcome mirrored Tieri's intent. His personal demeanor reinforced his influence. He remained calm in crisis, composed under scrutiny, and consistent across circumstances. This stability created a sense of reliability that others mirrored unconsciously. People adjusted to his pace, manner, and expectations, aligning their behaviors without conscious thought. His presence, though understated, commanded attention by virtue of consistency. He also recognized that influence must evolve. Static methods become predictable and eventually ineffective. Tieri continuously assessed strategies, refined communication patterns, and modified his engagement to match the shifting dynamics of the city and the people within it. Adaptation ensured that his influence remained relevant, resilient, and resistant to challenge. Tieri's influence extended into matters beyond immediate operation. He shaped alliances, investment decisions, negotiations, and even social interaction. Through discreet guidance, he affected outcomes across multiple spheres simultaneously. Yet he remained unobtrusive. The more effective his influence, the less visible it became. He avoided exploiting influence for vanity or personal recognition. Influence is strongest when unnoticed. Public acknowledgement invites challenge. Secrecy preserves authority. Tieri preferred that outcomes speak louder than his presence. Results mattered more than credit. The effectiveness of influence was measured not in applause but in the smooth functioning of systems and alignment of decisions. Moreover, Tieri recognized that influence required ethical subtlety within its own framework. While operating in the underworld, he maintained a personal standard. Manipulation was a tool, not a habit, and it served objectives rather than gratification. He avoided actions that would produce unnecessary backlash or long-term instability. Influence without foresight could become dangerous. Foresight without subtlety could become ineffective. Time magnified his influence. Decisions implemented through others matured while he remained at a distance, observing, adjusting, and redirecting only when absolutely necessary. This allowed him to maintain clarity, reduce exposure, and preserve long-term advantage. Influence, carefully applied over time, created momentum that no single confrontation could achieve. Frank Tieri's power did not come from visibility, confrontation, or volume. It came from the quiet orchestration of events, the patient alignment of interests, and the consistent application of judgment. Through subtle guidance, he shaped outcomes, stabilized systems, and navigated complex networks with a skill that was invisible yet undeniable. In the end, the measure of influence was not how loudly it was expressed, but how thoroughly it became embedded. Tieri's influence was complete, pervasive, and enduring precisely because it was subtle, strategic, and invisible until it had already achieved its purpose. It was the quiet, relentless force that directed outcomes while leaving the impression that the world moved by its own accord. That is the art of influence, and Frank Tieri had perfected it. The most resilient structures in life are often invisible. Frank Tieri understood this as he built networks, not with noise or spectacle, but with quiet precision. His influence did not rely on intimidation or fame. It relied on connection, trust, and subtle alignment. Relationships were not mere social interactions. They were strategic instruments that allowed him to operate with freedom while maintaining authority. Tieri approached networking as an architecture. Every individual he associated with had a role, whether explicitly recognized or not. Some provided information, others executed operations, and still others served as intermediaries or buffers. Each connection was deliberate, and each connection contributed to the stability of the system as a whole. No person was indispensable. Redundancy was built in so that failure in one area would not compromise the network. Communication within his network was calculated. He did not broadcast instructions or announce decisions. Instead, information traveled through careful channels, filtered by those best suited to interpret and execute it. Messages were concise, necessary, and timely. This discipline minimized mistakes, reduced exposure, and ensured that the network functioned efficiently without requiring constant oversight. He also practiced discretion and observation. Tieri absorbed details continuously, noting behavior, reactions, and subtle shifts in tone or demeanor. These observations allowed him to gauge reliability, predict moves, and preempt issues before they became crises. The network was not just a tool for action. It was a lens through which he could view and interpret the evolving landscape. Trust formed the foundation of this architecture. Tieri cultivated it slowly, testing individuals subtly before granting them responsibility or access. Loyalty was never demanded. It was earned through fair, consistent, and measured behavior. Those who demonstrated reliability were integrated deeper into the network, while those who faltered were managed without spectacle. Their influence naturally reduced. He understood that human relationships were fragile and unpredictable. As such, he avoided overexposure or reliance on any single individual. Flexibility was built into every interaction. Alternatives were always in place, ensuring that no unexpected failure would threaten the integrity of the whole. Contingency planning was a constant, not an afterthought. Tieri also leveraged social dynamics to stabilize his network. He observed natural alliances, rivalries, and ambitions, subtly guiding relationships to prevent conflicts that could disrupt operations. By allowing natural tensions to exist while preventing escalation, he created a self-regulating system. Individuals operated within their own spheres, but their actions aligned with the broader objectives without conscious awareness of his orchestration. Patience was key. The network's strength grew over time, not overnight. Tieri did not rush recruitment or engagement. He allowed relationships to develop gradually, observing patterns of behavior and commitment. Those who persisted, adapted, and demonstrated consistency became pillars of the structure. Those who faltered were quietly sidelined. Time served as both filter and test. He also avoided dependency traps. Individuals who relied too heavily on his presence or approval were subtly nudged toward independence. Tieri believed that sustainable systems did not require central oversight at all times. Empowering others carefully and selectively strengthened the network without diminishing his influence. People felt agency, while the system maintained cohesion. Information management was another critical aspect. Not all knowledge was shared universally. Tieri compartmentalized intelligence according to roles and necessity, ensuring that sensitive material was only accessible to those who needed it. This reduced risk and maintained control, while giving individuals just enough awareness to perform effectively. Conflict management within the network was subtle. When disputes emerged, he rarely intervened directly. Instead, he allowed natural processes to play out, while quietly guiding outcomes. Timing, tone, and subtle suggestions were used to redirect tensions toward resolution, without anyone perceiving interference. Those involved often believed they had reached a solution independently, reinforcing their own commitment to the system. Tieri's network extended beyond operational purposes. It included alliances in areas that seemed peripheral, but offered strategic advantages. He maintained relationships with individuals who could provide insights into shifts in politics, law enforcement, or rival activity. These connections functioned as early warning systems, allowing him to adjust strategy before threats materialized. He also recognized the value of reputation in sustaining the network. His own consistency, fairness, and reliability created a magnetic effect. People aligned with him voluntarily, seeking stability and trust rather than coercion. By modeling the behavior he expected, he reduced the need for enforcement. Influence spread organically, reinforcing the network from within. Adaptation was continuous. Conditions changed, pressures evolved, and the urban landscape shifted. Tieri monitored these changes constantly, adjusting the network as needed. Redundancy, flexibility, and observation allowed the system to absorb shocks without visible disruption. Stability was maintained not through rigidity, but through responsive design. He understood the human element at every level. People were motivated by self-interest, fear, ambition, loyalty, and habit. He recognized these forces, allowed them to play out, and integrated them into the functioning of the network. The system thrived not in opposition to human nature, but by working within it. Through quiet, deliberate cultivation, Frank Tieri constructed a web of influence that was simultaneously vast and unobtrusive. It functioned efficiently, absorbed risk, and remained resilient in the face of unpredictability. Decisions flowed smoothly, outcomes aligned with his long-term vision, and individuals within the network operated with autonomy, unaware of the guiding architecture that ensured cohesion. His approach proved that power need not be visible to be absolute. Through patience, observation, discretion, and strategic alignment, he had created an enduring framework that sustained his position, protected his interests, and allowed influence to extend far beyond what any single command could achieve. In the realm of silent networks, Frank Tieri was unmatched. Risk is unavoidable in life, but the way it is managed distinguishes survival from ruin. Frank Tieri understood that instinctively. Every move he made, every association he nurtured, and every decision he allowed to unfold was weighed against a potential consequence. He treated risk not as a fear to be avoided, but as a variable to be calculated and optimized. Tieri knew that the world around him thrived on volatility. Markets, rivalries, law enforcement pressure, and personal ambitions were constantly shifting. Some individuals embraced risk recklessly, seeking immediate gain or notoriety. Tieri did not. He understood that excessive risk created exposure, and exposure invited attack. True power, he realized, was sustained over time, not measured by immediate victories. He approached decisions as a craftsman approaches a design, examining each element, anticipating outcomes, and leaving room for adjustments. Opportunities were never evaluated in isolation. They were measured against the broader context of stability, loyalty, and long-term influence. Reward mattered, but it was always secondary to the preservation of position. and continuity of operation. When potential gains appeared enticing, he paused. The allure of rapid expansion, sudden profit, or public acclaim could mask underlying vulnerabilities. Tieri analyzed the landscape. Who might object? What systems could be disrupted? And what chains of events would follow? He preferred slow, calculated returns that could be sustained, rather than flashy wins that attracted unwanted attention. He understood the human component of risk intimately. Ambition often clouded judgment, and emotion often dictated action. Tieri's success relied on observing these tendencies in others and using them to maintain control. He anticipated impulsive behaviors, redirected them subtly, and allowed others to act in ways that seemed independent but ultimately aligned with his strategy. Influence, carefully applied, mitigated risk without direct confrontation. Timing was another crucial factor. Even low-risk opportunities could become dangerous if pursued at the wrong moment. Tieri learned to wait for alignment, conditions where action was easiest, oversight was minimal, and outcomes were predictable. Patience, in his experience, often yielded more reward than aggressive pursuit. Those who rushed often created exposure that could not be recovered. He also managed risk by building redundancy into every system. Dependence on a single individual, method, or channel created vulnerability. By creating overlapping structures, Tieri ensured that failure in one area would not compromise the whole. This principle extended to personnel, communication, operations, and financial matters. Redundancy was an insurance policy silently embedded into the architecture of his influence. Loss was inevitable, and Tieri accepted it. He did not pretend to be infallible. Minor failures were contained and corrected quietly, with minimal disruption. The key was to prevent failure from cascading into catastrophe. He learned early that overreaction to setbacks often magnified them, while calm, assessment, and measured response neutralized damage. He also recognized the importance of perceived risk versus actual risk. Sometimes allowing others to believe a situation was more dangerous than it truly was created advantage. Fear and caution slowed potential adversaries, provided breathing room, and created opportunities for strategic maneuvering. Tieri's mastery lay in differentiating genuine danger from illusion and using perception to shape behavior. Reward, like risk, was never taken for granted. Tieri understood that profit, influence, or advantage could be temporary if not secured within stable structures. Every gain had to be integrated into the system, buffered against unexpected disruption. By embedding rewards into enduring processes rather than transient circumstance, he transformed fleeting opportunities into long-term benefit. He also avoided the temptation to overcomplicate strategy. Complexity can create illusions of control while increasing vulnerability. Tieri preferred simplicity within sophistication, systems that were robust yet manageable, decisions that were deliberate yet flexible. This balance reduced exposure and increased predictability. Financial discretion was a manifestation of this philosophy. Wealth was never flaunted, and spending was measured. Excess attracted attention, speculation, and risk. Tieri's focus was stability over ostentation, sustainable gain over rapid accumulation. Wealth was a tool, not a statement, and he treated it accordingly. Partnerships, too, were evaluated through the lens of risk and reward. Alliances with peers, associates, and intermediaries were pursued cautiously, ensuring alignment of interests and minimal exposure. He favored relationships that strengthened his position without creating dependency or obligation that could later compromise discretion. Even the smallest interactions carried calculated risk. Every meeting, conversation, or exchange could potentially reveal weaknesses or create misunderstandings. Tieri maintained composure, attentiveness, and precision, reducing vulnerability while extracting maximum informational value. This discipline extended to body language, tone, and presence. Control over self was control over circumstance. He also understood that risk was not static. It evolved with time, context, and external pressures. A safe opportunity could become dangerous as conditions changed. Conversely, a seemingly risky move could become advantageous if circumstances aligned. Continuous assessment, anticipation, and adaptation were necessary to navigate these shifting dynamics. Tieri applied the same principles to personal conduct. His lifestyle, habits, and visibility were managed to minimize exposure without appearing restricted. Predictable routines were avoided. Patterns were observed and adjusted to prevent tracking. Silence, discretion, and moderation became shields against unforeseen danger. Even in moments of apparent calm, Tieri evaluated potential risks. He prepared for unlikely events without obsessing over them, ensuring that contingency plans were ready and that his network could absorb unexpected disruption. This proactive approach prevented surprises from turning into crises. Ultimately, Tieri's success lay not in avoiding risk entirely but in mastering it. He combined patience, observation, discretion, and foresight to ensure that each connection and decision maximized reward while minimizing exposure. By aligning incentives, controlling perception, and embedding redundancy into every system, he created a network capable of withstanding volatility, uncertainty, and challenge. Frank Tieri did not measure power by the victories of a single moment, but by the endurance of his position over years, even decades. The balance of risk and reward was not a calculation of profit alone. It was the delicate calibration of action, perception, and consequence, orchestrated in silence and executed with precision. In this balance, he found security, influence, and continuity, and it was this mastery that allowed him to navigate the unpredictable currents of his world with unshakable confidence. Observation is a skill that extends far beyond seeing. It is the act of understanding what is present and what is absent, what is said and what remains unspoken. For Frank Tieri, observation was both a shield and a compass. It allowed him to navigate a world where miscalculation could be fatal and insight was often hidden in the smallest of details. He approached every interaction with intent. Every handshake, glance, and pause was noted. The subtleties of behavior, from the flicker of an eye to the hesitation in a voice, were clues to thoughts, motives, and vulnerabilities. Most people overlook these signs, distracted by noise or their own assumptions. Tieri used their inattention as an advantage. While others acted impulsively, he collected information silently, piecing together patterns invisible to the casual observer. Observation extended beyond people to circumstances. The dynamics of a room, the arrangement of furniture, the placement of objects, even the timing of arrivals all provided context. Nothing was incidental. Each detail contributed to a larger understanding of the environment and the actors within it. He cultivated an awareness that was simultaneous and layered, capable of tracking multiple threads without losing focus. Tieri also studied behavior over time. Momentary anomalies were noted but not overemphasized. Patterns were far more revealing than isolated incidents. Repeated actions disclosed priorities, tendencies, and loyalties. Through meticulous attention, he built mental maps of individuals and groups, predicting responses and anticipating moves with remarkable accuracy. Silence enhanced his observational abilities. By remaining quiet, he avoided signaling intention or emotion, allowing others to reveal themselves freely. People often spoke more than necessary when faced with silence, unwittingly, offering insight into their ambitions, fears, and weaknesses. Tieri listened without interruption, knowing that understanding often required patience more than interrogation. He combined observation with memory. Every detail was cataloged and cross-referenced against prior encounters. This allowed him to detect inconsistencies, track evolution, and recognize opportunities or threats before they became apparent to others. Memory, in his hands, was not passive. It was an active tool for strategy and survival. Observation was also a tool of subtle influence. By demonstrating awareness without announcing it, Tieri shaped behavior indirectly. People adjusted in response to perceived attention, sometimes correcting themselves or modifying plans in ways that aligned with his objectives. The mere presence of careful observation could guide actions without explicit instruction. He understood that observation required objectivity. Emotional reactions could distort perception, introducing bias and misinterpretation. Tieri trained himself to separate assessment from feeling, to regard behavior as data rather than judgment. This detachment allowed clarity even under pressure, ensuring that decisions were informed rather than reactive. He also observed the unspoken social currents that influenced action. Power, influence, fear, loyalty, and ambition created invisible forces that guided behavior more reliably than formal rules. By mapping these forces, Tieri navigated complex networks with precision, predicting alliances, conflicts, opportunities long before they materialized. Environmental awareness complemented his social observation. He noted logistical patterns, security measures, patterns of movement, and timing. These factors informed decisions about safety, opportunity, and strategy. He treated the world as a dynamic system where each element interacted with others, and understanding those interactions provided strategic advantage. Observation extended to intuition as well. Tieri learned to recognize when a situation felt off, when something was misaligned even if it could not be immediately articulated. Intuition was informed by years of careful attention, a synthesis of micro-details, context, and memory. It was rarely wrong because it was rooted in cumulative evidence rather than instinct alone. He also applied observation to risk assessment. By watching how others reacted to pressure, challenges, or opportunity, he could predict vulnerability and stability. Understanding human behavior allowed him to anticipate moves, avoid traps, and exploit openings without aggressive confrontation. This foresight minimized exposure while maximizing control. Observation was not passive. Tieri acted based on what he saw, but always deliberately. Decisions were informed by the totality of information, considering not only immediate effects but cascading consequences. Without understanding was reckless. Understanding without action was wasted. He also understood the value of indirect observation. Not every interaction required his direct involvement. He cultivated networks of observers, intermediaries, and informants who could provide perspective from different angles. By aggregating information from multiple sources, he gained a holistic view without revealing his own presence. This skill extended to personal safety. By observing patterns in behavior, routines, and environmental cues, Tieri could anticipate threats before they materialized. Awareness was preventive. It allowed him to maneuver safely, minimize exposure, and respond decisively when necessary. Observation also reinforced his authority. People recognized, often unconsciously, that he understood more than he revealed. This perception enhanced compliance, loyalty, and alignment. Influence was strengthened not through coercion, but through the quiet power of awareness. Through decades of disciplined practice, observation became second nature. It shaped every decision, guided every interaction, and protected every move. It was not a skill exercised occasionally, but a continuous state of engagement, a lens through which the world was interpreted and understood. Frank Tieri's mastery of observation allowed him to operate effectively in uncertainty, navigate complexity, and maintain control without overt force. It was the silent engine behind his decisions, the quiet intelligence behind his influence, and the foundation of his enduring presence. In observation, he found clarity, foresight, and power quietly, invisibly, and inexorably guiding outcomes in a world defined by unpredictability. Patience is often misunderstood as inactivity. For Frank Tieri, it was the most active form of strategy. He knew that the world moved too fast for impulsive action and too slow for short-term thinking. Strategic patience was not passive waiting, it was careful, deliberate, and persistent engagement with circumstances, timing, and human behavior. It was the method by which he achieved influence, stability, and resilience in a world of constant volatility. Tieri observed the consequences of haste all around him. Men who acted impulsively gained recognition quickly, but often lost it just as fast. Their victories were ephemeral, their mistakes public and irreversible. He did not envy their speed because he valued longevity. Power, he understood, was not measured in headlines or immediate gain, but in endurance and the capacity to shape outcomes over time. Strategic patience allowed him to operate beyond the reach of immediate pressures. He structured his life to cultivate patience. Every decision was assessed not only for immediate consequence, but for its effect on the future. He calculated timing carefully, understanding that an action taken too soon could expose vulnerabilities, while one taken too late could forfeit advantage. The mastery of timing was inseparable from the mastery of patience. Observation played a critical role in this approach. Tieri monitored the movements of rivals, the tendencies of allies, and the fluctuations in broader circumstances. Information was gathered continuously and interpreted through the lens of long-term objectives. By understanding the rhythm of people, events, and environments, he determined precisely when to act and when to wait. Strategic patience also relied on discipline. Tieri resisted emotional impulses that might tempt rash action. Anger, excitement, fear, or frustration could distort judgment and accelerate decision-making prematurely. He trained himself to remain calm and measured, to step back and observe before committing, and to view each challenge as a component of a broader trajectory rather than a singular crisis. This patience manifested in his negotiations. He rarely pushed aggressively for immediate advantage. Instead, he allowed conversations to unfold, letting the other party reveal priorities, weaknesses, and intentions. By allowing the natural flow of interaction to provide insight, he could position himself advantageously without revealing his own leverage or intentions. Others often believed they were controlling outcomes, while Tieri had already subtly guided the direction to match his objectives. He understood that the appearance of inaction was deceptive. Outsiders frequently underestimated him because he did not respond to every provocation, issue, or opportunity immediately. They interpreted delay as indecision, when in reality it was deliberate observation and positioning. The contrast between their agitation and his composure amplified his authority and preserved the initiative. Patience also enhanced his ability to manage risk. By waiting for alignment conditions where consequences were minimized and opportunity maximized, he reduced exposure while maintaining flexibility. He avoided engagement in scenarios that were unpredictable or volatile unless timing could be controlled. When conditions were optimal, action became precise, controlled, and impactful. Tieri's strategic patience extended to the cultivation of relationships. Trust, loyalty, and influence were never demanded. They were nurtured over time. He allowed bonds to develop gradually, observing behavior under stress, testing commitment subtly, and ensuring that alliances were resilient before deep integration. Relationships built in haste often faltered, but those cultivated with care endured. He also applied patience in the management of his own reputation. Overexposure, premature action, or public assertion of authority could draw unnecessary attention and invite challenge. Tieri maintained a low profile, revealing only what was necessary, allowing credibility and respect to accrue slowly. When influence was needed, it was deployed decisively, supported by years of careful preparation. Strategic patience required foresight. Tieri projected the consequences of potential actions into the future, evaluating cascading effects and second-order outcomes. He accounted for variables beyond his immediate control, anticipating the responses of others, and adjusting plans without revealing them. This ability to foresee consequences allowed him to act decisively when timing and conditions were optimal. Even setbacks were managed through patience. Tieri did not panic or react impulsively when events went awry. Instead, he analyzed the causes, contained the impact, and allowed situations to evolve naturally. By maintaining a calm and measured approach, he converted potential disasters into opportunities for adjustment and improvement. Patience also allowed him to conserve energy. Constant engagement and reaction were exhausting and increased exposure. By choosing when to act and when to wait, he maintained clarity, focus, and endurance. Others often depleted themselves in crisis, while Tieri remained composed, observing and preparing. He applied patience to influence as well. People required time to align with ideas, strategies, or expectations. Immediate persuasion was often resisted. By allowing others to internalize, reflect, and accept gradually, Tieri ensured that alignment was genuine and sustainable. Influence imposed too quickly could provoke resistance, but influence cultivated patiently became enduring. Timing extended to external threats as well. Law enforcement activity, rival maneuvers, and shifting alliances were all part of a dynamic landscape. Tieri waited for intelligence to crystallize before acting, ensuring that his responses were informed, precise, and minimally exposed. Patience transformed uncertainty into actionable clarity. Even opportunities were filtered through the lens of strategic patience. Not every opening was seized immediately. Tieri evaluated long-term consequences, alignment with overarching objectives, and risk-reward balance. The right moment, not the first moment, determined action. This discipline allowed him to maximize benefit while minimizing exposure. Over time, this approach reinforced itself. People grew accustomed to Tieri's measured pace. They recognized that when he acted, it was deliberate and consequential. His reputation for patience became a tool, creating anticipation, respect, and careful behavior among allies and rivals alike. Frank Tieri's strategic patience was not an action, but the art of timing, observation, and deliberate engagement. It was a conscious mastery of the flow of events, human behavior, and opportunity, allowing him to operate with influence, precision, and control. Through patience, he turned waiting into power, hesitation into strategy, and endurance into supremacy, navigating a world of volatility with an unshakable calm that few could comprehend and none could challenge. Control is often misunderstood as dominance, loudness, or the imposition of will. For Frank Tieri, control was neither forceful nor conspicuous. It was subtle, omnipresent, and precise. He understood that true mastery over circumstance, people, and outcomes did not require visible authority. It required the quiet orchestration of variables, the careful alignment of incentives, and the management of perception. Tieri observed the dynamics of human behavior more keenly than most. He recognized that people responded not just to actions, but to the anticipation of outcomes, the nuances of communication, and the implied expectations embedded in silence and presence. Control, in his hands, was less about issuing commands than about shaping the environment so that people acted in accordance with his objectives while believing they were acting independently. He structured interactions carefully. Meetings, negotiations, and exchanges were choreographed in ways that allowed information to flow selectively. Words were chosen for implication rather than instruction. Gestures, pauses, and subtle cues carried meaning that others might not consciously register, but which guided decision-making and behavior. By embedding direction into nuance, he preserved autonomy while steering outcomes precisely. Influence and control were inseparable. Tieri recognized that coercion invited resistance. People who felt forced to act often rebelled in hidden ways. Instead, he created conditions where cooperation was the easiest, most logical, and most beneficial choice. By engineering incentives and outcomes subtly, he ensured alignment without confrontation. The power of suggestion, patience, and strategic placement proved far more effective than overt commands. Observation remained central to this method. He continuously monitored body language, tone, and micro-expressions. He noted shifts in loyalty, hesitation in speech, and fluctuations in commitment. These observations informed adjustments in strategy, allowing him to respond in ways that reinforced control while maintaining discretion. Subtle correction, applied precisely, often prevented the need for visible enforcement. Control also extended to timing. Tieri understood that the moment of action could be as decisive as the action itself. He chose when to intervene, when to remain silent, and when to escalate. Premature action risked exposure. Delayed action could miss opportunity. By calibrating timing, he maximized impact while minimizing risk, creating an aura of inevitability in outcomes. He managed perception deliberately. The way people interpreted his presence, silence, or engagement was as important as any explicit instruction. He allowed others to believe they were influencing events, while he guided the underlying currents. Perception shaped behavior, and behavior shaped outcomes. In this way, control extended beyond direct action into the realm of psychological influence. Networks were an extension of control. Tieri built relationships not merely for utility but for stability. Each connection had a role, redundancy, and purpose. He observed how individuals interacted, identifying strengths, weaknesses, and tendencies. This knowledge allowed him to allocate responsibility and influence strategically, ensuring that systems functioned smoothly even in his absence. Control through structure was as potent as control through direct action. Conflict was managed through subtlety rather than confrontation. When tensions arose, Tieri rarely intervened overtly. He manipulated context, guided perception, and allowed resolutions to develop naturally in ways that preserved authority. Disputes dissolved with minimal friction because the conditions for resolution were quietly established. The parties involved believed they had acted independently, while the resolution aligned perfectly with Tieri's objectives. He understood that too much visibility undermined control. Those who constantly asserted authority invited challenge, scrutiny, and rivalry. Tieri maintained a measured presence, active but understated. His influence and decisions were often inferred rather than declared. This quiet approach minimized exposure while reinforcing credibility, respect, and alignment. Even in financial or operational matters, subtlety remained key. Resources were allocated with discretion. Transactions were structured to reduce risk while ensuring alignment. Delegation was precise. leaving room for autonomy but ensuring accountability. By embedding structure and expectation subtly, he maintained influence without overt micromanagement. Emotional discipline underpinned this approach. Tieri never allowed frustration, excitement, or impatience to dictate action. Reaction created noise and exposure. Composure ensured clarity. Calm observation and deliberate response enabled him to maintain a strategic advantage, even when circumstances were tense or volatile. He also recognized that control was temporary and situational. Attempts to enforce dominance permanently were futile in a dynamic environment. Instead, he focused on adaptability, maintaining alignment through persuasion, observation, and structure. Systems and incentives created enduring stability far beyond the reach of momentary authority. Subtlety extended to risk management as well. By influencing events quietly, he minimized confrontation and exposure. People complied not out of fear, but because alignment felt natural, logical, and beneficial. This reduced resistance, limited surprises, and increased predictability, making operations more resilient. Strategic patience amplified control. Tieri waited for conditions to mature, allowing opportunities to present themselves naturally. Premature assertion of control was rarely necessary. Timing, alignment, and the careful orchestration of circumstances often produced the desired outcome without visible intervention. Even in moments of crisis, subtle control prevailed. He maintained composure, assessed shifts in environment and behavior, and intervened only as required. The minimal application of authority produced maximum effect because it was backed by anticipation, insight, and credibility. His actions appeared effortless, almost invisible, yet they guided the course of events precisely. Frank Tieri's mastery of subtle control demonstrated that power need not be loud to be absolute. By combining observation, influence, strategic patience, and structural oversight, he created an environment where outcomes aligned with his objectives without overt assertion. People acted in accordance with his vision while believing they were acting independently, and the world moved in ways that reinforced his authority quietly, efficiently, and enduringly. Decision-making is the fulcrum upon which life balances. Every choice, from the smallest gesture to the largest undertaking, carries consequence. For Frank Tieri, the weight of decisions was never trivial. He understood that inaction was itself a choice, and that the ripples of each action extended far beyond immediate perception. Mastery lay not in speed, but in discernment, the ability to weigh risk, reward, human behavior, and circumstance before committing. Tieri approached decision-making as an art of calibration. Each variable was measured, observed, and considered. Information was collected through both direct engagement and subtle observation, and each data point was assessed for reliability, relevance, and impact. He distinguished between noise and signal, understanding that superficial data could mislead while subtle cues often reveal deeper truths. Every decision was grounded in knowledge, tempered by judgment, and guided by foresight. He also considered the psychological dimension of choices. People's reactions to decisions could amplify or undermine intended outcomes. Tieri evaluated not just the mechanics of action but the perception it would generate. A decision executed without awareness of human response could provoke resistance, suspicion, or misunderstanding. He internalized the nuances of behavior, allowing him to anticipate reactions and shape consequences before they occurred. Consequences were rarely linear. Every decision produced a network of effects, some immediate, some delayed, some visible, some concealed. Tieri thought in layers. He projected outcomes across multiple dimensions, considering both direct and secondary ramifications. By modeling scenarios mentally, he could identify leverage points, anticipate obstacles, and position contingencies before committing to action. He understood that indecision was often more dangerous than error. Hesitation created uncertainty, eroded credibility, and allowed others to seize initiative. Yet premature decision-making invited exposure and miscalculation. The balance between timing and commitment was delicate, and Tieri refined it continuously through practice, observation, and reflection. Experience guided him, but experience alone was insufficient. Each situation was unique. Tieri combined knowledge of past outcomes with an acute reading of present circumstances, ensuring that decisions were contextually appropriate. He avoided the trap of relying solely on precedent. Recognizing that the dynamics of human behavior and circumstance constantly evolved, information was filtered carefully. Not every fact demanded action, and not every opinion warranted weight. Tieri evaluated sources critically, distinguishing between reliable intelligence and hearsay, between relevant insight and distraction. Decision-making was thus both analytical and selective, grounded in rigor rather than impulse. He also embraced the inevitability of uncertainty. No decision could account for every variable. No plan was invulnerable to disruption. Tieri accepted that risk was inherent and incorporated flexibility into all strategies. Contingencies were embedded, alternate paths prepared, and options maintained. Preparedness did not eliminate risk, but it minimized its impact. Accountability was internal. Tieri rarely relied on external validation or approval. The responsibility for outcome rested entirely with him. This autonomy allowed him to act decisively, without the hesitation that comes from seeking consensus or reassurance. Confidence, however, was informed by analysis, not arrogance. It was grounded in observation, logic, and experience. The stakes of decision-making extended into relationships as well. Loyalty, trust, and influence were often determined by perception of judgment. Those who observed decisive, measured, and consistent choices were more likely to align willingly. Conversely, erratic or poorly considered decisions could fracture alliances. Tieri maintained credibility through clarity, consistency, and a demonstrated ability to navigate complex circumstances effectively. He also recognized the cascading power of small decisions. Minor choices, whether timing, phrasing, or allocation of attention, could set in motion outcomes as significant as any major action. Tieri treated all decisions, regardless of apparent importance, with respect, knowing that cumulative impact often exceeded immediate perception. Decision-making was inseparable from timing. The same action, executed too early, could provoke challenge; executed too late, could lose opportunity. Tieri's mastery of patience allowed him to identify the precise moment where action would produce maximal effect with minimal exposure. Timing, in his hands, amplified consequence and reduced risk simultaneously. He accepted that mistakes would occur. Error was an inevitable byproduct of complexity, but its impact could be managed. Tieri responded to missteps methodically, containing fallout, adjusting strategies, and learning from experience. He avoided panic, overreaction, or visible frustration, recognizing that composure under error preserved credibility and influence. Decision-making also required courage. Some choices entailed exposure, challenge, or confrontation. Tieri calculated risk carefully, but he did not allow fear to paralyze action. Courage, informed by insight, became a tool for maintaining initiative, shaping perception, and achieving outcomes that might have eluded those less disciplined. He considered both the immediate and long-term consequences of every move. Short-term gains that compromised strategic positioning were avoided, while delayed but sustainable advantage was prioritized. Tieri consistently chose paths that reinforced resilience, influence, and long-term stability over fleeting recognition or profit. Even in matters of enforcement or conflict, decisions were deliberate. He evaluated proportionality, potential fallout, and alignment with overarching objectives. Violence, threat, or confrontation were tools of last resort, deployed only when the environment, timing, and potential gain justified their use. Restraint, he knew, often achieved outcomes more effectively than aggression. Tieri's decision-making extended to observation of the broader landscape. Political shifts, economic pressures, and social dynamics were incorporated into his calculation. Every choice was a node in a network of interdependent factors, and his foresight allowed him to anticipate ripple effects that others failed to consider. This multidimensional thinking was essential to his enduring influence. Frank Tieri's mastery of decision and consequence was not a matter of instinct alone, nor of rigid rule-following. It was an integrated practice of observation, analysis, foresight, judgment, and patience. He understood that the measure of a man's power lay not in the boldness of a single act, but in the cumulative effect of choices made consistently, strategically, and with awareness of both risk and human nature. Each decision was a thread in a larger fabric of influence, carefully woven to endure the pressures of time, circumstance, and ambition, producing outcomes that reinforced his authority while remaining largely invisible to those who unwittingly participated in his design. In the world Frank Tieri navigated, reputation was more valuable than money, influence more powerful than force. He understood that perception shaped reality and that others' beliefs about him dictated their behavior, loyalty, and respect. Reputation was not granted. It was earned through consistency, discretion, and demonstrated competence. It became a form of currency, tradable, preservable, and convertible into influence, opportunity, and security. Tieri approached reputation strategically. He knew that one rash action could erode years of careful cultivation. He maintained a balance between visibility and discretion, allowing the right deeds to be observed by the right people at the right time, while keeping the broader orchestration of his power hidden. Visibility was carefully managed to reinforce authority without inviting scrutiny or challenge. He cultivated credibility relentlessly. Words and actions were aligned, promises kept, and judgments measured. People trusted him because his behavior was predictable yet effective. He was not feared for volatility or intimidation. He was respected for reliability, subtlety, and the consistent delivery of results. Credibility was the foundation upon which all influence rested, and Tieri fortified it at every opportunity. Reputation also functioned as leverage. Allies and rivals alike responded to the perception of his insight, composure, and capability. The mere suggestion of his involvement in a matter could redirect decisions, temper aggression, or elicit cooperation. By preserving the integrity of his reputation, he wielded power silently, minimizing the need for overt intervention. Tieri understood that reputation was a fragile asset. Misjudgment, impulsivity, or exposure could diminish it quickly. He avoided public spectacle and overt assertion, allowing results, relationships, and subtle guidance to speak louder than words. Reputation, once compromised, was difficult to restore. It required careful repair, patience, and demonstration of renewed competence. He also recognized the compounding effect of long-term consistency. Over decades, Tieri's measured actions reinforced the perception of authority and reliability. Patterns of behavior communicated competence, even in absence of direct engagement. The repetition of effective choices amplified respect, strengthened networks, and enhanced the durability of his influence. Social observation informed his management of reputation. He noted what others valued, feared, or respected, aligning his behavior to reinforce these perceptions without manipulation that would appear insincere. Reputation was not self-promotion. It was the reflection of consistent alignment between action and expectation. Tieri's approach to conflict further reinforced his standing. He avoided unnecessary confrontation, but when intervention was required, it was precise, effective, and discreet. The perception of capability, restraint, and decisiveness combined to strengthen his authority, creating an aura of control that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. People acted with caution and respect, knowing his involvement implied consequence. Financial conduct also contributed to reputation. Tieri avoided ostentation, understanding that excessive display invited attention, scrutiny, and vulnerability. Resources were managed to ensure operational security and sustain influence rather than public admiration. His reputation for discretion, pragmatism, and shrewd judgment in both wealth and operations reinforced his credibility. Loyalty within his networks was deeply tied to reputation. Individuals aligned themselves with him not out of fear alone, but out of confidence in his judgment, consistency, and strategic foresight. By preserving integrity in dealings, Tieri cultivated allegiance that was durable, dependable, and resilient against external pressures. Trust, once earned, amplified the strength of his influence. Observation of rivals further demonstrated the value of reputation. Tieri noted how others' perception of him influenced their behavior, decisions, and interactions. Competitors often tempered aggression, reconsidered moves, or sought alignment based solely on the awareness of his presence and discernment. His reputation preceded him, shaping the environment before he engaged directly. He understood the importance of selective exposure. Actions were revealed in a controlled manner, emphasizing competence, fairness, and strategic insight while avoiding unnecessary display or arrogance. Reputation grew organically, reinforced by consistent demonstration of skill and judgment, rather than by overt self-promotion. Others interpreted the results, and perception became self-reinforcing. Tieri also leveraged the narrative of reliability. People assumed he was aware of circumstances even when silent, that he understood complex dynamics even when unobserved. This perception reduced resistance, encouraged compliance, and created alignment without direct interference. Reputation, in this sense, functioned as an invisible extension of his influence, guiding behavior quietly but effectively. Mistakes were managed with equal consideration. Errors were never ignored, but they were contained, corrected, and framed through subsequent competence. By demonstrating recovery and continued effectiveness, he preserved credibility while reinforcing the perception of judgment and resilience. Reputation, like power, could be defended and restored when managed skillfully. He recognized that reputation was a strategic asset in negotiations, alliances, and confrontation. Its presence could create opportunity, prevent conflict, or enable subtle guidance. Reputation allowed Tieri to achieve objectives indirectly, shaping the behavior of others before engagement was necessary. Its power was exponential, operating both within networks and across rivalries. Even in moments of silence, his reputation worked for him. People acted in anticipation of his response, tempered their strategies, and aligned with perceived expectations. Control through reputation minimized exposure while maximizing influence, demonstrating the effectiveness of perception as a tool of strategy. Frank Tieri's understanding of reputation extended beyond mere perception. It was an integrated tool of strategy, influence, and survival. By cultivating credibility, discretion, reliability, and strategic visibility, he converted perception into tangible advantage. Reputation became a form of currency, tradable, sustainable, and powerful, guiding behavior, reinforcing networks, and extending influence across a world defined by volatility, ambition, and uncertainty. Legacy is the quiet measure of a life lived with intention, and for Frank Tieri, it was the culmination of decades of strategy, observation, and influence. He understood that true impact was rarely loud or immediate. It was enduring, woven into systems, relationships, and perception in ways that outlasted any single action or achievement. The strength of a legacy lay not in public acclaim, but in the invisible structures and enduring influence left behind. Tieri's legacy was built through methodical action. Every network he developed, every alliance he nurtured, and every operation he orchestrated was designed not only for immediate effect, but for long-term stability. He worked quietly, deliberately, ensuring that outcomes were embedded within resilient frameworks. Influence persisted even when he was not present, operating autonomously because the structures he built were sound, and the people he trained were competent and aligned. Observation remained central to this endeavor. Tieri recorded details meticulously, noting behaviors, patterns, and tendencies of individuals and groups. This awareness allowed him to anticipate challenges, guide development, and ensure the smooth functioning of operations over time. Those who appeared independent of his guidance were, in truth, influenced by subtle shaping that ensured alignment with his long-term vision. Legacy in his hands was an architecture of human behavior. He valued discretion as a cornerstone of durability. A legacy shouted to the world could attract scrutiny, envy, or disruption. By remaining understated, Tieri preserved both his safety and the longevity of his influence. Actions spoke louder than declarations. Outcomes proved his methods. The quiet accumulation of respect, credibility, and trust formed the foundation of a legacy that others could observe, rely upon, and continue without understanding its full orchestration. Tieri's approach to leadership reinforced sustainability. Authority was exercised through influence rather than coercion, and systems were constructed to function even in his absence. Delegation was strategic, responsibilities were distributed with precision, and redundancy was built into every facet of operation. This ensured that legacy was not dependent on one individual, but on the durability of the structures he created and the competency of the people within them. He understood that a lasting legacy required integrity in execution. Promises were honored, agreements were maintained, and fairness, even when applied quietly, reinforced loyalty and trust. The cumulative effect of consistent, principled behavior enhanced credibility, strengthened relationship, and ensured that his influence could persist across generations of associates and rivals alike. Actions mattered more than words. Character mattered more than visibility. Strategic patience, played a decisive role in securing legacy. Tieri recognized that the full impact of influence often unfolded over years or decades. Immediate gains were subordinate to sustained stability by waiting for the proper moment, allowing relationships to mature, and ensuring that systems were aligned, transformed short-term actions into enduring structures. The patience embedded in his strategy was the mechanism by which transient opportunities were converted into permanent influence. He also navigated the balance between power and perception. The quiet demonstration of competence, reliability, and foresight reinforced authority without overt assertion. Reputation was cultivated methodically, and perception became a tool of influence. People acted in anticipation of his guidance, aligning behaviors and decisions in ways that preserved cohesion, stability, and operational effectiveness. Legacy was strengthened not through visibility, but through the subtle shaping of expectation and action. Networks were central to his enduring influence. Tieri built relationships with precision, recognizing the interconnectedness of individuals and their impact on the broader system. Loyalty was cultivated over time, reinforced through observation, consistency, and reciprocal benefit. People aligned themselves with him not merely for immediate gain, but because of the credibility, insight, and stability he demonstrated consistently. Legacy, in this sense, was both relational and structural. Risk management also contributed to the durability of his impact. Tieri avoided exposure while ensuring that operations, alliances, and influence could withstand uncertainty. Contingency planning, redundancy, and careful observation ensured resilience in the face of disruption. Legacy was preserved because systems, behaviors, and structures were designed to endure beyond immediate challenges, minimizing the threat of collapse. Decision-making reflected foresight as well as discretion. Every choice considered not only immediate effects, but cascading consequences. Tieri anticipated the reactions of individuals, the shifts in circumstance, and the long-term implications of action. By aligning choices with enduring principles of stability, loyalty, and discretion, he ensured that influence persisted beyond the moment, embedding his legacy into the operational, relational, and perceptual landscape. He also embraced the inevitability of change. Circumstances evolved, alliances shifted, and generations of associates emerged and passed. Tieri adapted, maintaining influence while allowing structures to evolve naturally. Legacy was not static. It was dynamic, embedded in systems capable of adjusting while retaining alignment with core principles. His enduring impact lay in the resilience and adaptability of the networks, procedures, and behaviors he cultivated. Tieri's mastery of subtlety magnified legacy. Influence operated silently, guiding behavior, shaping decisions, and reinforcing structures without overt intervention. People believed they acted independently, yet their actions aligned with his strategic vision. Legacy, therefore, was invisible yet tangible, pervasive yet unobtrusive, enduring yet unobtrusively integrated into the flow of events. Observation, patience, discretion, and structural foresight combined to produce enduring influence. Every interaction, every choice, and every relationship was considered for its contribution to long-term stability and alignment. Tieri's methods ensured that even after he was no longer present, systems would continue to function, influence would persist, and his strategic vision would be carried forward by the very structures he had created. Frank Tieri's legacy was not measured in headlines, accolades, or public acknowledgement. It was measured in stability, alignment, and continuity, the silent endurance of influence across time. Systems operated effectively, relationships remained intact, and perception reinforced cohesion and respect. Through deliberate action, careful observation, strategic patience, and subtle guidance, he ensured that the effects of his life extended far beyond any immediate moment, creating a quiet but unassailable imprint on the world he had navigated with unparalleled skill. In the final analysis, Tieri's life was a testament to the power of silent influence, strategic patience, and meticulous design. Legacy was the ultimate manifestation of control without coercion, guidance without intrusion, and impact without spectacle. The structures he built, the relationships he nurtured, and the perception he cultivated ensured that Frank Tieri's presence would endure not through public acknowledgement, but through the ongoing function of the network. Decisions and influence he had orchestrated with precision and care. His power, quiet and invisible, had become eternal,